Hello, everyone. Welcome to a Qobuz chat with Rod Argent and Colin Blunstone, also members of Cage the Elephant and Portugal the Man. We're going to talk about the new Zombies record. We're going to talk about some old Zombies record. We're going to talk about how their music has been influential in many places in this world. I want to thank Qobuz for doing this today. I want to introduce everybody. Please, Kyle, starting with you.
Yeah, my name's Kyle. I play keyboards in Portugal the Man, and super stoked to be here.
Welcome. Cage the Elephant, all in one shot there. Please introduce you guys.
I'm Matthan. I play keyboards for Cage.
Nick, I play guitar.
Great. Welcome, guys. Eric?
Hey, Eric Howk, Portugal the Man. I play in a band with Kyle over there, and really happy to be here with everybody on screen. This is great.
Me too. Welcome, everybody. Rod and Colin. So, a new record. Tell us about the new record. Tell us about, how the songs came together and how it was recorded, please.
Well, the thing is that we came out of a period just before COVID when we were fortunately inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We thought we'd never get there. It was our fourth attempt.
Congratulations, by the way. Long overdue.
Well, thank you very much. And we were coming off a long period of working, particularly in the States, and we felt the band had never sounded so good. And we had this idea in our head that we wanted to get back and start recording a new album. And we wanted to really reverse the sort of technique of recording and go right back to the sort of recording we used to have to do because we had so many limited tracks in those days, where we wouldn't do anything remotely or layering of tracks. We would get everybody in the studio at once. So you could have that whole process of the musicians bouncing off each other and Colin doing a live guide vocal, which extraordinarily turned into many of those live guides being the master vocals in the main part, so that we could get to the process of trying to capture something, as was always the process in the old days. So you do a few takes and you thought you were pretty well rehearsed, but the takes would all be okay, but then something would happen on one take where you felt that you really captured the essence of the song or what things were all about, and the whole band got excited together. And this was a way of imagining being on stage in a way, but using all the modern techniques of recording as well. We would all put harmonies and stuff on afterwards. We thought we would replace all the solos, but in fact, most of them happened pretty live, actually, as it happened. And we would record it turned out that we started to record 2 tracks just before COVID hit badly. And we loved how they sounded. And we couldn't wait to carry on with that process. But actually, what happened was that then COVID hit and we couldn't get the band together in one room. So we gradually ground to a halt. And then it took the best part of 2 years before we could get everybody back together. But we were really keen to do that, to have everybody in the studio at the same time. And we loved that process. We had a ball doing it. And the other thing was that we wanted to do it in the way that we did Odyssey and Oracle, in the sense that for the first time with Odyssey and Oracle, it was totally an in-house production. I mean, I've got a great studio here. It's only small, but it's great. And it was actually designed by the guy that designed all the acoustics on the Abbey Road control rooms as well. And it was wonderful that he did that. And he did it at a really cut down price. But the studio's great. So we had this whole process where we were in charge. And as far as we could, we made the album to sound, for the songs to sound exactly like we wanted the sound, the songs to sound. So I'm not saying that another producer couldn't make a great result, but it would be different to how we were imagining the songs in our minds. And that was, is that a good summing up, Paul?
Pretty much, yeah. I think that was pretty much it. And we actually recorded in this room here, and I did the vocals about 1 feet, 2 feet over there.
And we have a live room next
That's
door
it,
to us.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's very compact, but it is big enough to record a band live. And yeah, it was a really, really great feeling. Of course, the other complication we had is that our bass player, Soren Koch, actually is Danish. He lives in Copenhagen. And not only was it difficult for us to get together in the pandemic, but we had to get Soren over from Denmark as well. And so, as Rod said, there was a kind of a 2-year gap in recording this album. But once we got the band back together again, the actual recording itself was quite fast. They're great musicians, and and they record very quickly.
Colin, how did you like singing again with a live band?
Live in the studio, I love it.
Yes.
I love it. I mean, the guys in the band say that it helps them. They play differently. If it's not just me, but if someone is singing with them, they play differently, and I sing differently. Singing with the band, so I'm all for it. Yeah, absolutely.
A couple of tunes I want to ask you guys about. Rediscover, such a beautiful piano tune, Rod. Tell me how that one came together.
Well, thank you. Well, actually, on tour at one point with the Beach Boys. I'm sorry, the Brian Wilson band, yeah, with Al Jardine. And I used to love hearing them warm up every night, and they would always do some old a cappella vocal thing, next door to us, and it sounded great. And I had a day off, and I had a keyboard in my hotel room. So one morning, I thought, I'm just going to write an 8-bar a cappella sequence and just see how the guys responded to it. So I did that, and obviously, I mean, I wasn't copying anything the Beach Boys did, but I had that idea in my head of trying to get an a cappella vocal multi-harmony thing, which had some dissonance in it. It had some very unusual intervals, and then a song would come after that. And I did it, and the next day the guys went through it in the warm-up room that we had, and it sounded lovely. And I thought, right, I'd written it out, and it was ages later before that turned into the beginning of a song, because when I got back home, and I had that unusual advantage, which I never thought of from COVID, that even though it was very, very frustrating, it gave me the chance to write the whole album, apart from Colin's beautiful last song that I'd already heard, which was absolutely lovely. So I wrote the songs, and I wrote that song, which has some really sort of jazzy chords in it, and I thought Colin might find quite difficult to come to grips with. But you were all over it, weren't you? I mean, I think that was pretty much one take of a vocal.
Yeah, it's you never know which songs are going to be easy and which songs are going to be a challenge. But that one seemed to be very natural for me to sing. The one that was really difficult, it's a really soft ballad, and you thought that would be a cinch.
I thought that would be a total cinch for you. Yeah, and it took you a while to come to grips with that, didn't it?
Is it Love You While I Can?
Yeah.
Love You While I Can. Rod thought that would just be a 5-minute vocal, really, really easy, and it was really challenging for me, and I can't tell you why, but it was.
And that's the first single from the record.
The single.
Yeah.
Well, that was the second
Yeah.
one.
That's the second. Well, that's one of the singles from the record. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, just a stream one, because it hasn't gone to radio yet. I know, and it's the third single be going to radio. Yeah.
Secretly, I'm hoping we don't play that song live, because
you'll be fine.
I had such a nightmare laying that down. I'm kind of pleased. I want lots of hits on this record, but can it not be that one?
I understand. You Could Be My Love gave lots of old chamber pop echoes in that song. I mean, has the feel of what you guys are famous for. Tell me how that one came together.
Well, I had the idea of writing a song that was just piano, and when I started writing it, I then thought, oh, it would be lovely to do this live on stage. Before we recorded it, and that was one of the ones that we did live on stage, just before COVID hit, as I keep saying. And then I thought it'd be great to have a little bit of bass with it, so a little bit of bass came in, and then I heard something where that was very, very stripped down, but it had strings on it as well, and I thought it sounded really beautiful. So I'd just been introduced to a wonderful cellist called Jessica Cox, and she had a group called the Q Strings,
Yes.
who played with ELO and many people actually, and they were a joy to work with. And again, it was a really in-house production. It gave me the chance to actually write for some strings, which I did on 2 of the track, and a 3rd track was written by somebody else, which was very beautiful string writing, a classical composer actually. But with You Could Be My Love, we recorded the strings as well. I live in a barn conversion, and so the main hall it's got a very high ceiling. It's about 31 because it was an old threshing barn there, and it had a beautiful acoustic for the strings. And we just recorded it there. And as always, Colin was in the studio remotely, but it was all being fed through to him, and he was singing live as we went on. It was just a lovely experience. But it started off as a very intimate thing in my mind. I wanted a very intimate love song, well, it just came about. I don't know what more to say about that. Really.
I tell you one thing, with this song, because it is basically a piano and voice vocal acoustic track. Rod suggested we play this track live in concerts, but this song has gone down incredibly well. And 90% of the song is just Rod and me, and I thought that's when they'd all rushed for the popcorn and drinks and things like that. It's gone down incredibly song live, and it's been a joy to perform it.
It's beautiful
from the album in concert. Yeah,
it's beautiful. And last but not least, I have to ask. I mean, because any song with a title "I Want to Fly," you kind of have to ask about. Tell me about "I Want to Fly," which you guys do beautifully your whole careers.
That was the one song that we had already recorded before, and I said to Colin, do you know what? I'd love to I Want to Fly. And the reason is that when we did it the first time on a previous album, we had the whole band playing it, but I did an orchestral arrangement of that. But Colin did a beautiful album called 1 Year in 1970, and it was a big hit in the UK, and we had a big hit record in the UK from it. But
wonderful record.
The bits of that album that thank you very much. The bits that I really adored on that record, and Chris White as well, who co-produced it with me, we both really adored, were the ones where it was just a song with Colin singing with a beautifully composed string section. And I really fancied it. I said, I'm going to play that to Chris Gunning and see if he likes the song. He absolutely loved the song, and he said he would love to do it. But he said to me, can I hear your version, the orchestration you did? I said, no.
Yeah.
I'm either going to, you might hate it or you might love it, but whatever you think of it, it's going to colour how you hear it. And I want your natural response to it right from the start. And he did the most beautiful arrangement. And I know that, and it actually was a song that you loved anyway, didn't you?
Oh, I've always loved that song. I think it's gorgeous. Fantastic lyrically. And it's a great song to sing. It's a real favourite of the songs we've recorded in this incarnation of the Zombies.
Yeah. And it's one of my favourite songs that I've written, over the years. So it was great to have the chance to do it. And to me, it sounds very reminiscent of what we did on 1 Year. And it was lovely to have a throwback to that for us,
Yeah. Wow. It's wonderful, guys. Last but not least, is it really a different game these days? Is it really a different game? I mean, brave title, very brave title. Tell me about the title. How different is the game today?
But
yeah,
it's, if I can, about come from specific triggers, but at the same time have some sort of universal aspect. And I always think that, and we feel solutions and events that happen to us and many people as they get older find that things are different, and they don't even have to be older actually. Things can change and things can become a different game. It actually, strangely enough, to let you into a secret, the trigger for that was actually a band. Well, I'm not going to say who they were, but it was a band that had within it someone who, and the band had been very, very successful when they first started. And then as things went on and on, their whole life started to feel different. I mean, the beginning of the band, they were young, they had everything. They had success, they had all the young women they wanted. Everything was like pop stars, lots of people imagine the
rock and roll fantasy
thing to be. Nevertheless, anything rock and roll fantasy, and nevertheless, musically, everything turned out easy for them, and it was great. What they did was great. As they got older, things became more difficult, and one particular member of the band started blaming the other members of the band because he couldn't understand why so many years ago everything seemed so easy and now things were much more difficult. And instead of realizing the overall picture of what was going on, he was blaming specific members. That was the trigger for it. But then I thought, for us, when you're, looking back over the years, when you're younger, life does seem a very different game. I mean, now, just to say something prosaic, I take my hat. It sounds absolutely great when you're singing, and now, but Colin actually will practice for an hour and a half a day when we're on the road before the show, and do vocal exercise. And he didn't have to do that when you were writing, did you?
Not certainly. No. It is easier in many respects when you're younger, but also to answer your question about is it a different game now, in a light half I could answer that. It is very, very different, and it's changing all the time. It's not, it's different now to what it was in the 60s. It's still changing all the time. But the thing is that for me, the music business was a complete mystery in the 60s. And it's still a mystery now. It's a deep mystery for me, the music business. So although it's changed, I'm really fortunate. It's exactly the same for me. I've never understood it. I don't understand. So, well, in some respects, I'm fortunate. Music business, that's crazy.
Well, and I have to say, there's a certain timelessness. There's a certain it's the same in some ways because your music is timeless in many ways. And I think that the reason that it's time. I mean, one of the proof that it's timeless is the young musicians we have with us today who have been influenced by your music. Nick and Matthan, you guys want to? I'm sure you have questions for Colin and Rod, but tell us how you came about their music and how it's influenced you.
Well, for me, I think it was around 2005 when I sort of switched from being guitar focused to piano, and the album Odyssey and Oracle obviously influenced me in a big way, realizing how keyboards can be incorporated in rock and roll in such a beautiful way and make it stand apart from the way other bands sound. And then immediately with the new keyboard skills I had, I started getting gigs left and right. So I just loved pursuing that. And of course, I kept going back to Odyssey and Oracle constantly.
Yeah, maybe I should have said, tell me how Odyssey and Oracle influenced you, right? Because that's kind of where we all started with it in many ways. Nick?
Yeah, me personally.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I think there was like a certain time when I got into more songwriting than like playing. When I first got into music, I was just into like riff and learn how to play guitar. And then by probably the end of high school, I was more interested in songwriting and getting into you guys and Bowie and the Kinks. There's a Nielsen. There's like a thread of, I was like, wow, there's this beautiful rock music that's also has, you know, as you said, chamber pop or Baroque type chords and beautiful sounds, and the records are their own work of art. And the strings, you know, I didn't realize it was a mellotron at that time, but I was like, wow, there's the strings in it. And I definitely have questions about your string writing process, because on the new record, it's unbelievably good. Your arrangements are so deeply good.
Still is. Yes.
Yeah. And just using
texture. Yeah.
So go ahead, Nick. Go ahead.
No, I mean, just using those kind of textures in rock and roll is amazing. And I was curious. You sort of answered it, but I was curious. Did you guys cut those all in the room together? And did you? How was that process for you? You did.
How's the process of? Sorry, I missed some of that, but
you're arranging. Did you?
Is it writing with the two of us, or what?
I was curious if your string arrangements, did they come after, or you did it all together?
They came after. As I said, I Want to Fly was nothing to do with me, the string arrangement. But I tell you what happened on Different Game. I worked out the string parts and then scored them for this lovely group. And idea at the end. Now, this won't sound anything like it, so you'll think, what? But I was listening to a Prince track, one of his famous singles. I can't remember what it is now, but on the long version of it, on the album, at the end of the song, the string quartet just goes in some sort of improvisation, and it was pretty atonal. And I loved the sort of feeling over the last, after the song had finished. And on the single version of the song, it wasn't on there, but I loved that. And I thought, it'd be great to actually score out a little bit of strings. And I just played something, I just improvised. If you remember the end of Different Game, it goes, when you think it's all finished, it goes into a little string thing, which is quite classical. And actually, I improvised that. And then, I mean, I couldn't do it again now, but I did. And I'm playing it to my wife and saying, I think this would be a nice idea to, put at the end of the song. And she said, well, you've got it. And I said, no. This is an idea for it. But she said, just think about it. I think you've got it. So I scored it out as it was. And that honestly it at the end of it. So that was very instant and very improvised at the end. But I did work out the parts of the strings during the song after we laid down the main part of the song. So that came afterwards. The one on You Could Be My Love, that came after the whole track was down. But I had the idea of wanting, when we got to what was going to be the solo in the middle, and I keep the piano fairly much down there now, I thought it would be beautiful if it just surprised people by suddenly a whole string section coming in quite a loud volume and having the stage, if you like. And I love the effect of it. And then, of course, with Colin singing against after the solo section, the instrumental section, his voice just soared on that, and I loved the combination of Colin's voice. Actually, I always think it's a lovely combination. So that's how that came about. I think they're the only two string arrangements I did, aren't they, on the album? And the third one was the Chris Gunning one.
Beautiful. Yep. I mean, the outro of that, like you just said, I was listening pretty loud in my studio the other night, and I like out loud, like, woo! I mean, that's a beautiful, heavy string arrangement, and when it does come in, it does have that like, whoa, I'm in a new world effect, and it's so good. So your intention.
Oh, bless you. It's lovely.
Absolutely.
It really means a lot.
Sorry for myself.
Wow. It really means a lot to hear you say that, actually. It really does, because this album was a combination of not taking time about things, but then scored that section, which had already been played, by me when I improvised it. It took me ages to score it properly.
Yeah.
Because you just have to work the cues and my mind at rest, and we made it work. But it's lovely, and it's lovely to hear you guys, and to hear that. It always amazes me how people that you wouldn't imagine are really turned on, to you. But musicians have a really wide canvas often. If they're good musicians, they listen to so many things that people wouldn't imagine them listening to, and people like to put everyone into a category, but that's not the case. And it's great to hear you say this very much.
So Matthan, you have a question for Rod.
Yeah, what's your favorite keyboard, if you have one?
I think possibly if I had to answer that just one way, I would say piano, but that's from a personal point of view. I gave myself a huge treat about 15 years ago, and I bought myself a 9-foot German concert grand, Steinway German Model D, and I absolutely love playing on that. It's just wonderful. But for recording purposes, I love the Fender Rhodes Mark V that was around 1975. I love a Hammond organ as well, and I love the Wurlitzer. So I mean, I do love using those, and I don't think I love one more than the other. But most days I play something on the Steinway concert grand, and I feel really privileged to have it, actually.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah.
And I have one more question: is did the tow truck driver know that he was going to be on the cover of your next album?
Good question.
No, I don't think he did. I don't think anybody knew. But I mean, it certainly was an experience. It was 107 degrees. That the truck caught fire, the engine caught fire, and when we obviously had to get out into the desert, and it was 107 degrees, and we were there for about 5 hours before we got rescued, and then Rod took that particular picture of the guy taking us away.
And when I saw the picture, I loved it for a couple of reasons, because I liked it as a record of what was going on, but also the bit on the left, as you look at it, looked a little bit like E.T. It had this unreal quality about the light in the desert, and about and with it, it's all stands in the distance, and that on that switch, and I thought, wow, that's a lovely cover, and a lot of people thought the same. And Chris Tuttle, one of our managers, American managers, said, this could be an album cover, and I love the late Jim Rodford, who was in the Kinks and the founder member of Argent with me. I remember a friend of his saying one day to him, "What do you do all day when you're not playing?" He said, "Do you go to coffee bars?" He said, "What?" The reality of touring is that you might have an 8-hour. It's not 8 hours every day. But you might have an 8-hour trip, and then you've got an 8-hour day because you've got checks and everything else, problems, and then you've got the set, And then you get back to the hotel, and I don't know about anybody else, but I can never go straight to sleep when I get back to the hotel. So it might be 1 o'clock before you're in bed, even with the best will in the world. And then you might be up at 8 o'clock the next morning, 7 o'clock the next morning. That's the truth of it, Cole, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite tough. I mean, you guys know as well as we do.
Yeah,
it's fairly full on. I remember when we were kids, often it was sort of tradition to just play 1 or 2 songs. There would be many acts, 14 acts. They'd just play 1 or 2 songs, and of course it's nothing. You can walk on, play a couple of tunes, and then Marty, let's go, come on. Nowadays, there's a stampede for the hotel to get to sleep. Just going back to the van, I noticed on the side of the desert there were all these holes alongside of the van.
I can tell this is a really good story.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to hear this.
We're back.
Yes.
Okay. So, Colin, please continue. Kyle and Eric, you guys are going to get your minute. I promise. It's going to happen. Is it just me, or do those guys look great?
They look fantastic.
Totally.
Yeah, I know. They look fabulous. I don't know that I ever looked as good as Colin does now. I mean, after all the years and the whole thing, and
it's so fun, like going through all of it, calling it a different game, and then hearing so many of the similarities in the different touring acts. Like when we met them in London, like I said, they were coming from a thing and they were going to another thing, and like the scheduling was still kind of exactly the sort of days that we were having in London. And
so it's not a different game, Eric.
And seeing the get towed out of it, how many buses have we had break down? It never happens in the best place. It's always in the desert.
Yeah.
In the middle of the
It
desert.
doesn't happen like in downtown Manhattan.
You're never by a mall. You're never by a hotel. You're always by a cactus and a rattlesnake.
I understand.
We're on the phone now. I don't know if this is going to be better for you.
Because we lost you on the iPad.
Sounds good. So.
Okay. So, Collins, continue with your story about the desert.
Well, I mean, it was. Do you know what made me most anxious was that road wasn't very wide, and so we could get half the truck off the road and into the desert, but there were these huge trucks going by at very fast, and I was really concerned about that, even more than the snakes, to be absolutely honest. But all's well that ends well. And we have a fantastic road crew, and they had to organize 3 vehicles. We actually had a merch truck behind us, so they could take some of the stuff. Then we had to get a guy out to the one that's on the album cover to actually take in the truck that had caught fire. And then we had to get what we would call a people carrier to take about 12 people who were left over. So we actually had to use 3 different vehicles to get to the next town. It was a military maneuver, but as I said, we have a wonderful road crew, and they got it together. How on earth they did it, I don't know. I just kept very, very quiet, and I didn't dare say what I was thinking. I started thinking, we're doomed, it's all over.
At least we have water.
Yes,
Cole.
yes,
At least we have water, thank God.
Yeah.
And you got art out of it. You got your album cover out of a crazy day.
We got
an album cover out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that for the next one, though.
No. So, Eric and Kyle, I want to give you guys a chance to tell me how your music was influenced by these 2 gentlemen, and how ask questions about their new music or their old music or whatever you like.
Yeah, enormously. Kyle, you want to lead off? You want me to do it? So I got a lot.
I imagine so. You can lead off if you want. Yeah, go ahead.
You guys were kind of at the perfect time. Growing up as a kid in Alaska in the 80s and 90s, obviously, like, She's Not There, Tell Her No, were staples in the oldies circuit. But there's so many different levels to the zombies and to being a zombies fan. And once you figure out that Time of the Season is the same group, I think it went Tell or No for me. And then once I figured out Time of the Season, I got my hands on Odyssey and Oracle. And then when I came to Seattle, I would go to this record store called Easy Street Records, and alphabetically, you went in the front door, you turned to the right, and it was the end of the rack, and you were in the Z's. You were in the Z's, and so you could kind of do all this digging through it. And it was right around the time that I got my hands on Zombie Heaven, which was the 4-disc kind of retrospect. And it was always fascinating to me how good of archivists and historians you guys are about your own group. And, to have all those kind of rare live on the BBC cuts on disc 4 really blew my mind, because, you always try and find, nuggets and, psych and 60s garage pop, going through the alphabetical rings in the record store. But with you guys, you kind of had your own section full of rarities and oddities, and you're and you're still doing it is the thing that blows me away. I was a huge 1 Year fan. I love that album, and going back to those incredible arrangements where it's just Colin's voice and the strings. When last year you came out with That Same Year, to know that there's this glut of material and different versions that you're sitting on. In our group, we'll record different versions of a song, sometimes like 8 or 9 deep, different keys, different feel, different tempos. I don't know that they're ever gonna see the light of day, but with you guys, you found ways to really do a great service to some of those alternate versions, and you've given them proper releases. So I guess where I'm going with this is how many different alternate takes of different game tunes are there? Like, are there like 4 or 5 different versions of Drop Reeling and Stupid that we're going to hear, especially if you're recording live takes? Like, how deep does that go?
Well, I mean, Drop Reeling and Stupid is pretty much one of the early takes. I mean, we did record them quite quickly in terms of modern recording. I mean, I guess most sessions were 3.5, 4 hours long, weren't they, Cole, when we got the whole thing? We got the things down. I think that with Drop Reeling and Stupid, that was one of the early takes. So the other takes would be very similar. It would just be the solo that would be different, really, because the harmony parts are the same. So there wouldn't be that much different. I mean, there'd be slight differences in the guitar playing, although the approach is the same. We used to, in fact, we sort of tied down the approach pretty early on, didn't we, Cole?
On this album
when we were doing it. Yeah.
But I think that one of the reasons there's so many different versions and of songs and so many different albums, we had someone, a lady called Carol Broughton, that was looking after the masters, and taking into account there really were only 2 zombie albums, and she was very inventive. So she would give non-exclusive rights for the B-sides to go on an album. And then there would be another obscure set of tracks that people didn't own the exclusive rights to them. She could take some of those and it would be on another thing. The Zombies at Christmas. I made that up, but the Zombies at summer. But basically there were only 2 albums. And I think she did us a great service in a way, because she kept the Zombies name there. I mean, it was not at a particularly high level, but she kept things ticking over by these very inventive albums that she managed to get released. And a lot of it was the same material. With regard to the demos on 1 Year, Chris White's sons were going through the attic at Chris's house and just to catalogue his songs, and they found these 2 reel-to-reel tapes of demos of mine. I didn't even remember some of those songs, and I must admit I was a little apprehensive that those tracks went on to the double album version of 1 Year that's just been re-released. But so far they seem to have been received really warmly. But they're such a long time ago, and in some respects I wouldn't even call them demos. They're just song ideas. But it does give people an idea of the kind of songs that I was writing at that time. So it does sort of illuminate that period in my life. But so a lot of these things are kind of chance, really. If those songs hadn't been found in Chris's attic, that second album of the 1 Year release would not have happened.
We hadn't heard them, had we, Cole? For many years.
It was really bizarre. After like 40 or 50 years, I was listening to those demos and I was fairly sure it was my voice. But on some of those tracks, I didn't recognize the songs. I really didn't. So it was a very interesting experience. But there again, just going back to this lady, Carol Broughton, who's looked after our masters, without her keep reissuing these albums, I mean, I there's a good and a bad side to that, I suppose, but I think it kept people, made people aware of the Zombies back catalogue on some level, because these albums kept being released.
Kept your name out there. Yep.
Yeah.
Eric,
Kept the name out there.
What else?
Remember, all these songs were recorded between 1964 and 1967, a very short period of time, and we were playing live all the time. So there was very little time for writing and recording. We had to record very, very quickly.
Mm. I mean, we were only together professionally for 3 years, weren't we?
Yeah,
Cole?
we were.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then Colin was playing me some of the, those demos made at the time of 1 Year, and I said, "Who's that on piano?" He said, "That's you." and then I said, "And who's doing those high backing vocals?" He said, "That's you." Honestly, I couldn't remember. Well, mind you couldn't remember having heard those things. No,
I couldn't remember. Yeah.
Well, that Zombies Heaven box that came out like right around the same time that Nuggets came to the States. I remember it was the same kind of like 4, 5, 6 disc CD kind of thing. But here, like now, all of a sudden we've got like all these alternate and rare takes and live takes, and it was just a really cool way to like dig deeper, because you don't always have access to do that with your favorite band. Sometimes the album is the album. So thank Carol, and thank goodness for that. And yeah, I think that same year, some of those tracks like really bridge into Ennismore, and it feels very comprehensive. It feels like the same period of time with the same energy. So as a super fan of that material, I was really grateful that now there's something to dig deeper on.
Right. Well, the box set that's I think it's a 4 CD box set that was released. It was in the late 90s, and at the time I was touring with a solo band, and there was a release party at the Jazz Cafe in London, and all the original players from the first incarnation of the band were there. And in my band, there were some really, really top players.
Top session players, yeah.
Absolutely top players. But a funny thing happened. We were playing a set to the audience. It was packed out. I saw all the original guys coming towards the stage. I could see them coming, and I thought,
it wasn't intentional. I can tell you.
I wasn't quite sure what was happening. And they came on stage, and completely unrehearsed, they took over the guys' instruments on the stage, and we played. And Paul Atkinson, our guitarist, was saying, "What are we going to play? What are we going to play?" And we played "She's Not There in Time of the Season." And it's one of the first times it really came through to me how special that band was. Completely unrehearsed. I had no idea they were going to come on stage. I'd just been playing with some of the top players in the country, and yet when the original Zombies started playing, there was something very, very special about the performance that they gave. No rehearsals. We hadn't played together for 30 years. I was absolutely amazed, and I must admit I stored that thought up for later on when Rod and I managed to get back together again. It was the first time I really truly realized that the Zombies was a special lineup. There's something about it when we all get together, and it's so hard to fathom exactly what it is, but it's certainly different, and I think it's really exciting when the original band gets together.
But we didn't mean to go on stage. What happened was that there was quite a famous DJ in the audience, and he was presenting Colin's set, and he said, and he hadn't spoken to us, but he said, "I know you're all in the room. You've got to come back. You've got to come out here on stage and play something." So we did, and we played "She's Not There," and that was fine. And then they said, "Well, you've got to play another song." And I said, "Well, what else can we do?" And I said, let's just do Time of the Season. So we started to play it, and then Paul Atkinson, our guitarist, said, "I've never played it." And it struck me suddenly that we'd recorded Odyssey and Oracle and never played any of it live, ever. And it was quite extraordinary. So Paul said, I've got to turn my amp down, turn it off. So he turned his amp fully down, and someone saw that we started playing there, someone said, "I can't hear the guitar." "Oh, look, the amp's turned down." And they went on stage and turned it up. And Paul said, "No, I've never played it."
He played it in the studio, right?
In the studio,
in 1967, but he hadn't played it for 40 years.
Yeah.
So I think his memory of how the guitar part went was probably a little bit dim and distant.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's great. Eric, what else?
Oh, that's just fantastic. It makes me wonder. I guess we covered if there's different versions of the new material, but what else are you sitting on? What else is out there? Is there an alternate version of Ennismore? Is there some deep Argent stuff that we don't know about?
Some wonderful live shows that are still yet to come to the surface.
Yeah, because you were always a smoking live band.
Well, there might be, but I don't know where they are. We tended to use everything we thought. I mean, we made demos in those days, and just before Odyssey and Oracle, we particularly made demos of things we liked, and they were very different to the way the singles turned out. And Chris and I, particularly writing the songs, got very disappointed in how some of the songs that we'd written were mixed on the recent singles before Odyssey and Oracle. That's really why we wanted to do Odyssey, because we wanted to get our own ideas about how our own songs should sound. And so there were quite a few demos that we thought were much better. I mean, we covered Little Antony's Going Out of My Head before it was a hit in the UK. And we did a version which we thought sounded fabulous with all the harmonies, didn't we? On a demo. I don't know where that demo is now. But when Ken Jones, our producer, produced the record, it was a terrible mix, in my opinion.
Awful.
And we got very, very disappointed. But particularly with our own songs, because they weren't coming out the way we heard them. We had Ken's conception of them, but not our own.
It's funny, I was just thinking about Odyssey and Oracle when you just mentioned it there. And in 2008, we decided to do a 40th anniversary concert, a celebration of Odyssey and Oracle with the original band. Remembering that Paul sadly had passed away, but Hugh and Chris hadn't played since 1967. So I don't know, is it 40, 50 years they hadn't played. Rod and I were touring, so we kind of presumed that we would be fine. But we had this conversation, we thought, we've said we're going to play Odyssey and Oracle in its entirety at the Shepherd's Bush Empire. It's quite a prestigious place in London. Maybe we should just check out if Hugh and Chris can actually play it. So we, without being too straightforward with them, we said we should just get together and just run through these tracks. And so we started to play Odyssey and Oracle. Hugh and Chris were absolutely note perfect.
We were terrible.
Rod and I, who thought, as we were playing live, we would be great. We were atrocious. And it was really embarrassing that they played it so well. And we were sitting there ready to judge them. And we were just awful, so embarrassed. But it really encouraged us to start rehearsing for our own sakes. But it certainly didn't work out the way we expected it to work out. And then, you know, when we played it again, Chris and Hugh, they hadn't been on a professional stage and given a professional performance since 1967 till 2008. And they were great.
But what we decided to do, though, as well, was to use the current band along with them. We had 15 people on stage, I think, or within the group that was playing, because we wanted to reproduce every note that was on the original album, and that was the first time that we multi-track things at all. And I mean, when I say multi-track, I'm talking about 4 tracks plus an extra 3. So we basically were working on 7 tracks. But you know, some of the high falsetto things that I did. Chris's wife, who's got a beautiful voice, did those. We had Jim Rodford playing with the singing a harmony. We had Darian Sahanaji from Brian Wilson's band doing the mellotron stuff, which he knew better than I did, actually, to be quite honest.
It was really funny to hear a conversation between Darian and Rod. And, you know, Rod wrote the songs and obviously knows them very well. And Darian would say, you know, that's not quite right what you're playing. And I thought there's going to be an explosion here, you know, and Rod said, you're right. You're playing it right and I'm playing it wrong. Darian knew that album
inside out, didn't he?
He knew it so well. Yeah.
It was great having him.
Yeah.
That's great. Kyle, I want to give you a chance. What questions, observations, tell me what you think.
Man, I used to put on Odyssey and Oracle every morning before I got in the shower, and I'd have to crank it because I would be in the shower. And then every single day around the middle of Rose for Emily, my roommate would come out and yell at me like, "You fucking asshole," and turn it off every day for like, you know, just hundreds of days in a row. That was always such a good morning song for me. But yeah, I mean, I'm a keyboard player. And I kind of grew up with like a classical background, and then like started loving like psychedelic rock and 60s stuff. So like you always did this thing that I couldn't quite put my finger on, which kind of like made it kind of magical, you know, because I didn't quite ever know what you were doing. If I had $1 for every time somebody's like, "Can you just like do like a zombie, like a Rod Argent solo thing?" I'm like, "Fuck, man, it's not as easy as it sounds," you know. I was trying to ask you about in London. I was like, "How do you go about some of that?" And you were like, "Oh, it's modal." And I was like, "I don't really understand." Like I remember. But I mean, listening to the new stuff too, what's remarkable to me is like you guys have like it's like your DNA, you know? Like I listen to the new songs and I'm like, it's the fucking Zombies. And like that's such a remarkable underrated like quality in an artist that I think it's like one of the hardest things to achieve is to like have this DNA. It blows my mind that after all these years, I'm like, it just sounds like you, and that's so like genuine and hard to achieve. It's like, I mean, those are like goals for people like us, you know, to shoot for, you know. And I guess a question, you know, regarding like the songwriting stuff, I always kind of like have like a little drawer in the back of my brain that I've just filled with things, you know, over years. And sometimes, like when you write, do you sit down, you're like, "Oh, we're gonna write for this album," or do you find that certain songs might take 10 years to find their place, or how does that work for you?
Well, every song on this album was written in a reasonably short space of time. I mean, the great thing was because of COVID, I suddenly found myself with some unlimited time to actually keep working at a song, in the sense that because we weren't on the road or being involved in other things, I'd start with an idea that excited me, and then if I lost my way with it a little bit, I'd just walk away for a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, and then walk back into the studio. And it felt to me as if I could keep the freshness of it. The thing is that Colin and I often talk about this. I only know one way of working and writing a song, and that's the same way as I started when I was 16 years old, and that is to try and get excited about an idea and do it for real, and not try and copy anything else, but just make something work. And it's so lovely to feel something working, but you don't know where it's going to go from there. So I'll always phone Colin, and Colin will come round, and if he likes the idea of the song, then we'll work on it together, just as a voice and piano thing. And if we can start getting excited about that, we'll then play it to the band and see if we can make it work with the band. And it's the most exciting thing in the world to actually see something come to fruition and sound good, and maybe take on a life that was more than, or in a slightly different direction to the way you imagined it right at the beginning. And you know, I always feel you've only got one life, and you want to look back on it and say, well, I might have made mistakes and not done things to the standard that I wanted, but at least I gave it my best shot. And I think you've got to do that rather than try and copy anything else. That's the way we've always approached things. So we've always done it for real. And I think that, in a sense, is the way of keeping things fresh, because you're doing it with the same feeling that you did when you were 18 years old. I mean, the feeling is no different. And then if you're on stage, and particularly in the States these days, we often have quite a young component in the audience, as well as people that have followed us. I'm not being ageist. I mean, I don't care who's in the audience. It's great that anyone wants to come. But it's so great when you have, you know, really talented young musicians like you guys come up and introduce themselves, or you get this huge energy coming back from the crowd. And honestly, you feel as if you're 18 years old again. I mean, there's no difference, is there, when you're actually on that stage?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I mean,
so rejuvenating.
We've often said that there's more energy on stage now in this incarnation of the band than there was in the 60s.
Yeah.
You know, we give it everything when we're on stage, because I know that sometimes the criticism is leveled at bands from the 60s that they're just going through the motions. You know, they play their old hits and they go through the motions. That's absolutely nothing to do with us. You know, we really do give it everything when we're on stage. And of course, we mix lots of new songs with a lot of standard older songs and a lot of deep cuts as well. And I think that that's quite an interesting art to make a set remain interesting and exciting, but using some music from 50 and 60 years ago and some music that was recorded in the last few months. And it's very heartening to us that we get just a strong reaction from the new songs as we do from the old songs.
Yeah.
I think we're really fortunate in that respect.
I mean, we play, actually, I mean, you can imagine in the States when we play Time of the Season, it has a huge response, and sometimes we get a 5 and 6 minute standing ovation. And we'll follow that immediately with Merry-Go-Round. And one of the things I felt important to me on this record, there's so much energy on stage that I wanted at least 4 songs, say, on the album to have a real groove or have real energy, because you so often see people of our vintage put out a new album and they sort of cycle everything down a bit, and it becomes, you know, just a slightly more relaxed version. You know, we wanted that feeling of excitement on some of the songs, and then it feels like you can do the really, really stripped down, what you hope will become beautiful ballads as a contrast. But you need that contrast and you need that energy, because we get off on the energy on stage, don't we?
Of course we do, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course we do.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, when you're putting together an album, just, you know, hearing you be like, we need to have like 4 energetic songs. Like, I always find, like, maybe, like, say you're putting together, you got like 6 or 7 out of 10 songs, and then like you start to see it like take shape in your mind as a whole, and then you'd be like, oh, we still need a ballad to make this feel like a whole record, or we still need to like check these boxes to make this like a complete work. Or do you just write 10 songs?
No, I think you're right. I mean, I one of the things that I love about people starting to listen to vinyl again is that when they listen to vinyl, each side is just 20 minutes, and they tend to sit down. I mean, I'm just the same. I mean, I'll stream everything because it's so easy. And you find that when you stream, you'll start doing other things as you're listening. When you listen to a vinyl album, you'll put the side on and you tend to sit down and have the experience of the whole side of that record. And sometimes the it has two effects for me. One is sometimes a track that is not your favorite at all becomes your favorite because you get used to it. But secondly, the sequence of the album is really important, and a song that, you know, if you get the order right, it can be a little journey that you're making, and it can have more of an effect, an overall effect on you, and I think that's really important. And I think the order of an album is, I've always felt that that's important. You know, there is one very romantic song on the album, and I think it sounds much better for coming after Merry-Go-Round, which is a bit of a rocker. So it's the combination of what you want to hear after you've just heard something else, which is also important, I think. And I think we've always felt that, Colin, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely.
We've always put an album together that way.
Yeah, I think we've always talked about setting up ballads. You know, if you place them in the right situation on an album, it just feels totally different to if you just load the beginning of the album with all ballads. It just gives people the wrong idea of what to expect from the album. So I think the running order is incredibly important. The same as when you play live. I mean, I'm sure you guys do the same thing. You know? Sorry, go on.
How many sequences did you try out on the new record, guys?
Oh, I spent hours just continually playing one mix after another and trying to get something that I thought would really work. I mean, that's just my personal thing. I mean, I produced the album along with Dale Hanson, our sound man, who's very talented and a fantastic guy to work with, and he had a lot of input into that too. And really, I think you'll agree, Cole, we did it between us, Dale and I, didn't we?
No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for one reason or another, I must admit, I almost feel a little bit of an imposter, really, because my contribution was to learn the songs and sing them. But Rod and Dale did the rest of it.
Yeah, but you put everything into it.
I did, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can hear that.
Oh, thank you.
Of course.
I especially love that first second of the album with that organ. It just immediately grabs you.
It's a Zombies record.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Kyle, Eric,
that song.
Nick, and Matthan, anything you guys have that you want to ask? Anything else you guys have that you want to ask? Eric, I know you must have 14 more questions. I see you smiling.
I do one more that I was curious about. When it comes to like writing lyrics and stuff, and I know everybody does this like super differently. Where like I've never been somebody who like sits there with a sheet of paper and writes down, you know, like, oh, this is the poem, and then I go set it to music. Like I'll just like sit down, and I find that like certain lyrics just kind of like are born with the melody at the same time. And like, sometimes I'll just like something will just pour out, and it'll take me like years later to be like, oh, I know exactly why I was saying that years later. Like, what is your process? And like, do you find that like melodies and lyrics like are like this intertwined thing that are kind of, or they told you write a melody and then you sit down and put words to it?
No, I very often I do. I was knocked out to watch the Beatles documentary, Get Back, you know, because I didn't realise. I've always felt a bit of a charlatan because when quite often when I write, I might hear something, a certain groove or something, and think, God, I haven't written anything in a groove like that. And I'll put a tempo up, you know, on my, you know, there's no way I can program drums or anything, but on my computer, I'll just put like a kick drum and a snare or something, and maybe a little bit more in that sort of groove, and then I'll start actually messing around with the groove, and I might hit a couple of chord changes that I really like, and then I'll play those chord changes and then I'll start singing complete nonsense over them and sort of go, and I saw McCartney doing the same thing. I mean, I thought I'd always be incredibly embarrassed if anyone actually saw that process in any way. But the point is, what I find myself doing when I do that often, I mean, not everything is written like that, but what I often find myself doing is out of the rubbish that I'm singing, there be a few words which actually trigger something that's important to me, and it will actually. It's almost like, automatic writing. It'll trigger a thought, and I find that I've got a sequence of words which actually really means something to me and connects with something in my life, and I'll start writing the song around that. So it can happen that way often with me, but it's the most embarrassing thing for anybody to hear. So no one ever hears that until it starts to become something which I think is worthwhile. But I always, in the end, sometimes lyrics that I write are more obscure than others, but they always have a real meaning to me and a real connection. And I always hope, though, that they do reflect a slightly more universal experience where people can bring their own ideas of what that basic emotion is. So I don't know if that answers anything.
No, absolutely.
Eric, anything else? Nick, Matthan, anything else, you guys?
No, just letters of love, man. We're so glad to have this opportunity again and to kind of fan out and geek out. Colin, I know the last time we were together, I asked you if those rocket recording albums that you did, starting with Planes and on from there, you only have access to those on YouTube. So any plans for a release of those or a re-release of those anytime?
Well, the first two, Planes and Never Even Thought, were actually released as a double album in the UK, but the third one, Late Nights in Soho, has never been released. I know people do ask me about that. I think now I own those albums, so we'll have to wait and see. I think if there is a real interest, then they could possibly all three be released. And
this works. They were coy when I asked him if there was anything deeper in the vault, and here he is sitting on albums that have never seen the light of day. I knew it.
Well, I forgot about those, I'm afraid. But yeah, I mean, maybe we will do something. But Rod and I were always trying to think about the future. What's next? What are we going to do next? And I think sometimes we forget what's happened in the past, and sometimes there are tracks hanging around, but we spend so little time thinking about the past. We're just continually thinking about the present and the future. So maybe all three of those albums will be released.
Well, Dick Game is fantastic, and it's what's now and it's what's next. So we're lucky to be here, and we're lucky to have it.
Yes,
brilliant. Thank you.
Guys, everybody, thank you so much today. Thanks, Qobuz, for hosting this session. Remember, different game comes out in the United States March the 31st. The new Zombies record. Cage the Elephant, Portugal the Man. Thanks, Kyle, Nick, Matthan, Eric. Really enjoyed it today. Rod and Colin, great to see you guys. You're looking and sounding wonderful. Good luck on the upcoming record and upcoming tour.
Yeah, congrats on the record.
Congrats.
Absolutely.
Yes, congrats on the record. It's great.
Thank you so much, Robert. And it's been great to hook up with you guys, and
absolutely,
you guys have all made great stuff as well. So it's a joy to be talking to you.
Thanks, everybody.
Very much.
Okay, peace out. See you later.
Have a great
See you
day.
later. Cheers, guys.
Okay.
Bye. Bye.